So recently, I've been going on kind of a technical arc, I'll call it, in my personal life and also on this channel. You might have noticed I've uploaded more videos about Blender add-ons and Python and more technical stuff in general. And that's just because I'm more interested in it. And today, I'm going to make a tutorial kind of out of left field. And that is going to be how to make a website, okay? cgmatter.com, it used to look different. I just coded it myself in HTML. And I want to show you how you would do that. It's not particularly related to Blender, but, you know, maybe you want to make a website, maybe you don't. Maybe you just want to know how to use HTML. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, which is an easy and beautiful way to make a website. We're going to talk about that later. Here's a website I coded. It's all blurry, which you might think is strange. But this is because each element you hover over kind of comes into focus and does this kind of like a little animation. So right now, if you hit a Patreon, it will go over here. If you go to one of these text boxes, you can type in your message and it will be kind of typed in diagonally, which I think is cool. And I like all of these animations, and I figure, you know, it wasn't that hard. Like, I learned HTML through this project, so why not teach you? So I'm going to open up a text editor, basically a code editor. I'm going to use VS Code, but you could write it in Notepad or whatever. I'm not going to assume you know any HTML because this is a tutorial. The reason I like VS Code is it has a couple features that makes it really easy to type HTML really quickly. So if you hit Control-Shift-X, this is going to open up your like add-ons panel. So you can see I have GitHub Copilot. And the important thing is I have HTML preview. So what you want to do is you want to type in HTML, and you're going to see all of these kind of add-ons. I just have HTML preview, which lets me see what the website's going to look like as I make it. And that's kind of it, but you can have whatever you want. So with that in mind, let's do it. So start a new file. Even if you only see like Python or whatever, you can literally just write something like my website.html. The important part is the .html. You could call it whatever you want. And now, once we save it somewhere, we have an HTML file. But remember, I also have my viewer where I can split it. And hopefully some of you guys are like, weren't even planning on doing HTML, but now I guess you're learning it. You split the window, and I believe it's Control-Shift-V is the shortcut from that HTML preview thing that lets you see your website. You could also just use Google Chrome to look at your website, but whatever. So you can see as I type in stuff, it appears over here. And the way that HTML works is you can just type stuff in, and it will be there. But if I go to a next line, I didn't want that. If I go to a next line and continue typing, you can see that it almost doesn't care that I'm in a new paragraph. It just continues where it is. Even if I separate it by 2 or 3 or however many lines, you can see that it just doesn't care. So the first lesson is how do we kind of fix that? Now, by the way, if you see all of this gunk, right, like all of this autofill, I believe that's because I have the GitHub Copilot add-on, which is free for like a month. So again, if you go Control-Shift-X, you can see that over here. So how do we solve the issue of paragraphs? Well, to do it, you make something called a tag. What is a tag? It's basically, you know, brackets or whatever these are called. And you type something in like P. And P isn't random. I decided to do P intentionally. P stands for paragraph. And the way you can think of these tags is the first one is saying what type of tag are we using. And the second one, you can see it's the same letter but with a dash, is saying when we end it. Okay? So basically, in between these two is where I write my code. So if I say something like hello, you can see it's right here. Nothing has changed. But now, if I kind of take this and I copy it lower, now you can see we have a bit of a line break. Okay? So essentially, what we're doing here is we're saying This is a paragraph, and this is a paragraph. Note that the P and dash P is what is containing this stuff, okay? And then everything put here is on the next one, and I can just kind of repeat this process, blah, and you can already kind of write a text document. Like, it's not a website. I mean, it could be, but, you know, there you have that. Now, I wonder, I don't actually know, can you make a blank paragraph? Like, will this respect anything? I believe not, because I think you have to, like, put in content in here. But the moment I do, it makes a new thing. Now, you might be asking now, how do I, like, increase the spacing between paragraphs? And you could kind of style your sheet to say, like, put bigger spacing in between things. Or I could now introduce you to a new tag, which is the line break tag. So let's say I write hello and goodbye. Again, it's on the same thing. If I hit enter, it's still on the same line, so I have to use the paragraph. But let's say I don't want to, right? How would I separate these and have it go to the next line as if it was written like this? Well, next tag is called BR. And, you know, do you have to memorize these? Kind of. But if you have GitHub Copilot, you could just write, so Control-I to access GitHub Copilot, add a line break tag. And what it will do, hopefully, let me get rid of this. Add a line break tag. Add a line break. And you can see it already does it for you. So you can kind of use this like AI autofill to find the tags for you. But we have line breaks, and the reason I introduced this is it's faster. But you can now also control the spacing in a sense. It's almost like you're hitting enter, and this gap grows larger. So far, we have paragraphs, we have line breaks, and really that's all you need to write text. So next question is, how do I center my text? Whatever we write, whether it be paragraphs or line breaks, will basically be going down here. But what if I want my website centered? Well, as you would expect, there is a tag for that. Basically anything, there's a tag for it, or if not, you could code it up. So now we're going to be using something called the center tag. And as you might expect, this is going to center anything inside its content. So remember, we have our start tag and our end tag. So center and then dash center. So whatever word you have here, you have at the top and the bottom. Here you have a dash to say you're ending it. And you see now it is centered. Okay, if I go a line down and then continue typing, it will kind of go over here. And if I add in a line break, it should go lower. Okay, so you can go from middle to left to right. You have all kinds of alignments. So now we can really just type in text wherever and kind of keep it simple. Okay. So let's kind of start off with this. Let's do a welcome to my website, and all of this should be centered, okay? So I'm going to put this here. And now we have a welcome to my website, okay? And maybe I want it a bit lower. This isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but it is a functional way to do this. Now we have a line break, and you have welcome to my website. Now, the next question you might have is, if I have welcome to my website, it should kind of be big and bold and whatever, and how do you do it? Well, there's a tag for that. So normally the way you would make things bold in your text editor is you would kind of highlight it, you'd right click, and then there would be an option for bold. It doesn't exist in HTML. It does in something called Markdown, kind of, but there's a tag for this. So what I can do is I can make a tag. I can write B. B stands for bold. And just like these other tags, I can end bold. So dash B. And now if I keep typing, the rest of it is not bold. It's still in the center, but it's not bold. Okay? So as you can imagine, you can also kind of replace this with the letter U. U stands for underline. I believe I, and if not, we can just kind of look it up. I stands for italic, and you can kind of double these up. So if I use B, and then dash B. Now it's italic and bold. Sorry, it's italic and bold. So all of this HTML stuff is very useful and important, but at the end of the day, sometimes you just want to get a website immediately without all of this code, which makes sense. Let's check out Squarespace. Take these elements that are represented by squares or blocks, and you just rearrange them, you change their contents, and by default, they will already look amazing. But just like with HTML, they give you all the controls to modify it how you want. And here are 3 features you will like with Squarespace. The first one is you get analytics. Just right off the bat, you get to know who is going to your website, where they're from, stuff like that. Another thing that you get as a second feature is you get a content library. So you don't need to store all your stuff on some other server or whatever, pull references to different images and everything. So that's super nice. And then third of all, like I just said, it's very, very easy to construct a website. You can also inject HTML if you wanted to. So if all of this sounds interesting to you, head over to squarespace.com, make a website, and when you are ready to take that thing live, there's a link in the description that I have to save you 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain. But can we make this even bigger? We can. So another tag for this. There's a bunch of ways to do this. I'm going to introduce you to the header tag. So you can see I wrote H1 and then dash H1 to close it. So I'm going to contain everything in here. You can see all of a sudden it's bigger. H stands for header. 1 stands for the size. So if I now replace this with the number 2, you can see it's gone smaller. At least it should have. If I make this 4, it gets even smaller. And you can think of the number representing the size starting at the biggest. So now we have a nice welcome to my website. Now, let's say you wanted to format this even more, and now we're going to get into more specific tags with parameters. What if I wanted to take my text and make it a certain color? Well, now, again, it's always a tag. That's kind of the main takeaway. You write font. By the way, I'm going to space this out so we can actually write this. I'm going to make a font tag, which is basically going to edit the font. And now we ask ourselves, what do we want? We want the color to be red. So the way you would intuitively type this is you'd write color, and then the color is equal to red. And then make sure you have your close font in the right position, or it will not respect it. So welcome to my website is this. And this has colors built in. You could kind of use hex code. So if I make it white, you're not going to see it. If I make it gray, it's going to be faint. But let's say I want to keep adding to this. So let's say I want to highlight it yellow or whatever. The question becomes, if I keep changing this font, the highlight, the size, the literal font of it, do I need to keep adding in font tags every single time? You could, or we can actually start chaining these together. So let's say I want to highlight this as if it was highlighted with a yellow marker. I could just hit space. So now we're in a new parameter. And I type in style because I want to edit the style, and you kind of learned these. The style is going to be equal to. So in the same way the color is equal to red, the style is going to be equal to, well, I want to change the background color, and you're going to see that this kind of auto-populates, and you can kind of pick whatever you want. So I'm going to make the background color equal to, let's see if we can find yellow. And now you can see our text is highlighted yellow. Now, with VS Code, I believe, I don't know if it's special to VS Code, you can highlight over this color, and you get an interactive color picker. Which is cool. Okay, so let's say that this is the first iteration of our very boring website. The question is, how do we actually kind of open this up in Chrome and whatever? Well, what we can do is we can take our document. Remember, this is just text. It happens to be HTML code, but it's just text. I can hit Control S to save it, and right now it's saved on the desktop. And what I can do is if I open up Chrome, you can do this in any browser that accepts HTML, which is all of them. In the desktop, I can now find my file, if I can remember what it's called, my website, click and drag, and now you can see how it would interact with something like Chrome. You can also do this on, God forbid, Microsoft Edge. And it's kind of this like universal instruction set that works. So you can quickly test your website on whatever, okay? We have text, but let's make our thing like interactive. So I want to add layers of complexity. So after this text, I want to add in some kind of interaction, like let's say a button. And the question is, how do you add a button? Well, remember, pretty much everything ends up being a tag. So I'm going to start writing button. And when I close this, it's going to autofill. And you can see, very faint, but it has a button right here. And you can click it. Doesn't do anything at the moment, but, you know, you have a button. Well, how do we make it have text? Well, let's say the button goes to, like, google.com. You just type it in, and now you have a button that looks like this. Now, yes, we can change stuff about this button, like we can make it blue, whatever. But that is going to be using something called CSS, which I will also get into in a second. But you can think of a website as being 3 components, okay? So all of a sudden, it's getting more complicated. Well, it's composed of its HTML. That's what we've been doing. But then there's 2 other things. There's something called CSS, which is basically the style. CSS stands for the style of your HTML. And then JavaScript is basically the programming language that lets you do anything, right? Like you can write software that goes inside of here, okay? We are going to be focused on HTML and then CSS. So how do I use CSS to kind of style our button? Well, I can do this at the top of our document. So we're first going to define what the button should look like, and then we run our HTML. Well, let's do that. So I'm going to add in, again, everything's a tag. I want to change the style of what? Well, the style of the button. And to do this, I mean, you can see it's actually already autofilling, and I'm going to let it do that. But we're basically saying the style of the button, so it's going to reference this over here, is going to have all these parameters. So when I hit tab, you can see all of a sudden there's much more going on. And let's go one by one. So inside of here, and this bracket is basically containing all our code. Again, use GitHub Copilot to really autofill. There's no reason that you should need to memorize all of this. We have the background color, as you would expect. It lets you decide the color of your button, right? Background color is what is under the text, whereas the color is the actual text. So if I was to make this black, now you can see the text is black, okay? Additionally, we have all kinds of things like the border, the padding, the text align, whatever. We are just going to kind of start this ourselves and add things as we need it. So let's, yes, implement in the background color. I'm going to say that it is green. So now we have a green button, and I want the text. Remember, text is always represented by color. So you have your color and your background color. The text should be white, okay? So we have our nice button, but it's kind of losing a lot of its like appeal that it had before. Like there's no like evidence that you're clicking it or anything. And normally, let's think about what makes it feel like you're clicking it. Well, it's kind of 2 things. When you hover over the button, it's going to kind of change, like it's going to highlight or kind of get brighter or something. And then the second thing is your mouse pointer, this thing that I'm moving around. Well, look, as I'm here, it looks like a mouse pointer, but you can see as I entered the document, it's kind of changed. So here you have this line. So literally the cursor becomes a line, and then you have your standard pointer. So it kind of changes depending on environment. And that is something that will also make it feel like a button. So I can type in cursor, and this is going to say the cursor type. We could do any of these. So I can say progress, and this will look different on a PC or a Mac. They all have their own progress things. But now when I hover over it, you can see it has a progress thing. So you could really add in whatever you want. I'm going to add in something called grab, but you can pick whatever you want. Grab looks like this, and to me that feels like either you click and drag or you like click the button, you know, whatever you want. So this already feels more interactive, but how do we get a bit better? Well, what I want to do is I have a style for the button, fine, but that style should be changing if I am like clicking or hovering over it or something. So as you would expect to do that, we use a style tag. So again, everything we have is up here. And then that is going to be instructions for how to style our HTML. So if I want to change the button to, let's say, I don't know, yellow, you're going to see what this currently does. Well, let's not do yellow. It's very hard to read. Let's do like a teal. Currently, it kind of ignores our instruction for green. If I delete this, it becomes green. If I don't, it's blue. That's because we're setting the style of the button, but then immediately overriding it. So it's almost as if this didn't exist. Instead, I want to have two styles, one for the button and one for when we're hovering over the button. Well, easy modification. You go to your button, you specify what kind of thing, and you can see there's all kinds of stuff. I'm going to type in hover. So this style is only going to be referenced when we're hovering over it. So it's green, now it's blue. Already feels much more interactive, but let's make our button look much better. So I'm going to take the width of it, and you could say the width is in pixels, centimeters, whatever. I'm going to say that it is 40 px pixels across. Clearly, that was not enough. So I'm going to bump it up to 150. And you could make this short or long or whatever. But to make this button look nicer, I kind of associate that with a height. So I'm going to make it 50 pixels tall. Okay? And notice that, the size of it is going to remain constant because the hovering doesn't override it. But it could. So we could say the height when we're hovering over it is equal to 100 pixels, which is bigger than 50. So all of a sudden, you get that. Okay, so this looks pretty nice, but it kind of has this immediacy to it, which makes it look super responsive. So maybe you do want that. But, a lot of these website building services have a nice kind of smooth transition between these. And that might be something you want. So remember, it's telling us to put in a semicolon, so we can put in our next instruction. The command for this to kind of swap between these or transition between these is exactly what you would expect. It's transition. And we could write it up here or down here. There actually is a bit of a difference. I'm going to write transition. And let's say the transition, this is going to basically go between these, is 1 second long. So I'm literally writing in 1 second. Now, you can see all of a sudden, it looks very nice. We could have it be a bit or a lot faster by being 1/3 of a second, basically. So now it's much more, kind of feels responsive and quick. But you can see the moment I let go of it, kind of gets rid of it, which is fine. In fact, it's actually preferable for me. But if you don't want that, you can copy this line and put it in here. Okay? So now it works in both directions. Basically, the reason is, by default, it will transition. And only when we're hovering will it kind of go to this. So whether we're on it or not, it will always return to this state. Whereas if it was where it was before, the transition only happens when we're hovering over it. But I'm going to keep it that way. Okay? So let us take our button. I want to center it, so we could add a center tag, or we already have a center tag. So let me just put it inside of here. So now we have a website thing and a button. And while we're here, let me just get rid of the background color. I just wanted to show you that that is possible, but I want it to actually look better. Okay? And in fact, I'm going to make our text like a nice gray color. Okay. So some obvious things to do now are to add functionality to this button. But before I do that, I want to kind of emulate what I've been doing here with the blurring and all of that. And now that we have transitions, we're kind of perfectly equipped to blur it, to move it, and the transition is what is going to ease between these. By the way, if this header, right, this is what's making it big, doesn't feel big enough, by the way, I'm going to substitute the font to be more interior. Not that it should matter much, but just to kind of keep the same order of operations. If I wanted to make this bigger inside the header, I'm just going to write the tag big. And you can see what that does is if we position this in the right place, so over here, it's going to increase the size of our text. So it's saying take the text, make it bold, italic, make it gray, but then we're saying make it larger text and then also put it as a header. So just to really hammer this point home, I'm going to add 2 big tags, which means, of course, we need to add 2 closing tags. So I'm just going to put these here. And now we have 3 sizes up on the thing. And of course, you can use headers to also kind of modify this. So now it feels a bit more official. And to really make it official, I'm going to add in a underline, which, again, by default, it's going to autofill the close thing right behind it. I'm just going to put it in right here, as long as our text is contained. Okay? And then also, we talked about line breaks as one method to kind of space our button lower. Again, there's other options like margin and padding, but this is fine for me. Okay, so like I said, I want to add in motion and transitions and all of this. Well, what we can do is we can say, remember this transition is happening here on the hover. We can say that by default, so when we're not on this, let's say that the button is, I don't know, blurred. The thing for blur is you don't just type in blur, but it's actually considered a filter. Again, if you don't know this, you can just use a GitHub Copilot. So I'm going to add the filter of, there's so many, you can add a drop shadow, whatever. I'm going to add the filter of blur, okay? And it's going to say by how many pixels. I'm going to set it to 0, which basically means it's not blurred at all. As I increase this number, you can see it's getting blurrier. And because we have our transition, it's going to, do the transition, but it will always remain equally blurred, whereas our website kind of comes into focus, right? Well, that's because it's always keeping this blur, and even though we're doing a transition, we didn't overwrite the information, right? So our height was 50 pixels, now it's 100 pixels. That is what makes it expand. Well, if I want to get rid of the blur, we should say whenever we're hovering on this, it should overwrite that data. So I'm going to take the filter and blur it by 0, which means it's going to come into focus nicely. And let me reduce our height so it doesn't look as ridiculous. And now it kind of looks really, I don't know, it looks good to me. And just as easily, we could add in a rotation or whatever we want. So we could say by default, remember, we need to make an initial condition and what happens on the hover. We could have filter. Is this where translate is? I don't remember. If we can't remember it, of course, we can just kind of find it. Transform. Transform basically lets us, rotate, scale, whatever. And this might also be a way to increase the height in kind of a more desirable way. So let's actually maybe do that. So kind of getting swept away here, but we could have the transform scale be 1. 1 means scale it by 1, multiply by 1, do nothing. But as I increase this to 2, our button is bigger, but still maintains the same kind of logic, right? Well, what I can do is I could have it be 1 by default, and again, we overwrite this. We overwrite this in our hovering, so maybe the scale can become 30% larger. And now that looks nice. In fact, if you want, you could get rid of this height, which will make it behave a bit differently. This will make it just kind of resize as if we were just kind of dragging it in Photoshop, right, to resize. But the height is literally going to change the aspect ratio. And now we're getting a website that actually looks like decent. In fact, I'm going to get rid of, this is just stylistic stuff. I'm going to get rid of the italics because I think it looks bad. And in fact, I know we're going back and forth, but welcome to the world of website design. I'm also going to get rid of the underlining. Looks nice. Final thing I want to include is a bit of rotation. Remember, by default, it's flat, and then it rotates, and I think you can already see where I'm going with this. We add in a transform. We add in a rotate. There's all kinds of rotates, so you can rotate it in 3D. I'm just going to do a standard rotation on our screen. And by default, 0 degrees. Notice sometimes our number is just a number. Sometimes we specify it as a number of pixels. And now we're specifying it as a number of degrees. So typing in 0 is different than 0 degrees. I am going to transform this on our hover animation by rotating by 15 degrees, which seems to be quite extreme. There we go. In fact, I want it to get much larger, so let's say 50%. Even 2. Ah, I see. So you can tell, good thing, sometimes I make mistakes, sometimes I cut that away, but in this case, I'm going to keep it in here because you see suddenly our scaling doesn't work, and that might be something that confuses you as it confused me. Transforms kind of like overwrite each other the same way that we had these style tags when we didn't specify the hover. So now it always looks like that. Same thing with transforms. So what you want to do is you want to stack these. What do I mean by that? So I'm only going to have a single transform. And I can write that over here. So I can add an hour rotation. And now we kind of have to do the same thing on the top here. And get rid of this. So now it's a bit extreme. But we have our animation. By the way, the reason that it's flickering is as it rotates, our mouse is no longer on the button. So that's why it kind of looks weird. I'm going to rotate it by, again, like 6 degrees. 6 degrees. And I'm going to scale it by, I think we said 1.5 is what I want. Nice. Okay. So again, core lesson of that mistake I just made is the transforms you can stack, scale, rotate, whatever. In fact, we can also move the button. This will all make it look cooler. So I'm going to translate Y, which is saying translate it up and down rather than X. So by default, it will be 0. But then when we hover over it, let's have it kind of pop, I don't know, like up or down. Let's try 3 pixels. And I don't know if you can tell, it's a bit subtle, so I'm going to make it larger. Now you can see the button also moves. By the way, I think I did translate instead of translate Y. So now it kind of moves downwards. I can make it much more extreme, but not so extreme that the mouse is no longer over it. So, you know, just a bit of a something. By the way, you could put in a negative number, and now it will go upwards, but I want it to go downwards. So we can think of pixels as kind of going down this way, and negative goes up this way. Okay, so we put in a lot of work here, and do we have to do this for every single button? No, because now we just overwrote the button. So if I make another one for like Facebook.com, we get to keep that nice stuff. In fact, if I want them separate, I'm going to add in a line break. So now one is, you know, there. Maybe I should show you, by the way, how to like space things out without line breaks, but I want to keep this like simple for an introduction. Well, let me just say, if you wanted to do this, what you can do is, again, there's a tag for everything. Let's make a tag that like adds a bit of vertical space. And I might not remember how to do this, but kind of the essence of it is you use the div tag. And div tag is kind of like, it's kind of like an all-purpose kind of tag. You can think of it that way. So you could see what it actually auto-filled in for me. It actually already knew what I wanted. Is it added in a div tag, which you can think of as an all-purpose tag, just like a container. And the style of it is to be 50 pixels tall. So that is why we have a gap here. Let's make it 100 pixels tall. So we have our button. I now want you to imagine there's an invisible thing that's 100 pixels tall. And now we have that. Let's make it 50. And I can just kind of repeat this process. So let's have one go to Facebook, one go to Google, and one go to I don't know, Imgur. Google, Facebook, Imgur. okay? One thing, well, let's actually view our website. So again, Control S to do this. And now, well, I guess I have to drag it again, but if you kept it, you could have just refreshed the page. Now our website is in Google Chrome, and it just works. One thing I want to include is you're going to notice, it's kind of subtle, but this rotates kind of counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise. Guess I didn't do that perfectly. But the rotation is kind of inverted as we go down the buttons. That is something I want to do. Well, we kind of have this issue now where basically like all these buttons look great, but they have like the same instructions. So how do we take something like facebook.com and have it rotate the other way? Well, for facebook.com, all we have to do is we say we have a button, but it is a particular kind of button. So I'm going to say class is equal to Facebook. Okay? What does this mean? How did we just add a parameter for Facebook? HTML probably shouldn't have that. Well, class is basically saying we have a button, but it's a specific class, a type, a category of button. Particularly, it is the Facebook button. Okay, so now we can say we can put something in our style sheet up here, but have it only apply to Facebook. So imagine we take this. So this is the same thing, but the difference is we're going to say button, which one, dot Facebook. So now we are specifying which button, and I'm going to rotate it by -6 degrees. So let's see if that works. Works, right? So now it's going the other way. So it kind of seems a bit more intentional. In fact, you could even change other parameters, like making it a purple button when we highlight it. Okay? And you could do this for as many classes as you want. You just put in the button, dot, which is basically saying within the button category, there are more subcategories. One of them is Facebook. Okay? Let's make one for Imgur. So I'm going to write class, Imgur, same kind of thing. And I'm sure there's a way to do this kind of like more automated so you don't have to do it every single time. But we are not doing that. We are doing it every single time. And let's have this one kind of go red. Blue, purple, red. But it seems like I want the rotation to go back to what it was. Okay. So that is kind of like the essence of the website. Yes, I did have kind of like an autofill form. But I think the next thing to naturally do is to have the buttons actually do something. And I believe the tag for that is dash or bracket A. A stands for, I mean, I don't know what it stands for, but it's basically a link is the way you want to think about it. Again, we have A for link, and then we close it with dash A. And if you don't know, you can use GitHub for this, okay? So now the question is, how do we take this information and paste it inside our button? Well, if you do not know, what we can do is we can highlight it. And I really do recommend using this like autofill thing. I don't think it's cheating. It just kind of speeds you up. Hit Control-I for GitHub Copilot. Make this button go to google.com. And it will add in the necessary things. It might use the A tag, or it might do something else. There are multiple ways to do things oftentimes. So you can see it added button on click. When we click it, it's going to open up a window for www.google.com. And then this does say google.com, but it could say anything, right? And even though it says anything, it would still go to google.com. Now, I can't click it in here because we have to do it inside of our website, right? But this should work in theory. So let me change this back to google.com. We save it. We go to Chrome. We refresh. And now we have this update. And if I click this, it goes to google.com. Okay? So our buttons have functionality. Oftentimes what they will do is they will go to websites. But you can have a button change the color or the format or whatever. So to kind of get this real quick into the other ones, remember, we can just like have multiple parameters inside of here. So we could have class and what it goes to. So this one should go to Facebook. And this one should go to Imager. I don't know how it's pronounced. Okay, I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh. Now, by the way, since I do actually have a Facebook account, I'm just going to go into incognito mode, just so I don't like flash my Facebook or whatever. But again, you can drag the website. It will be in incognito mode, I believe. And let's try google.com. Great. Let's try facebook.com. Great. Let's try Imgur. Now, one thing you might notice is by default, it will kind of just open up the page. But what if we want it on a different window? Well, to be honest, I don't really know the command, but you know who does? GitHub Copilot. Control-I, have this open the website in a new window, and let's see what it comes up with. I think it will just add a parameter. So it seems like the only difference is now it's on-click window.open instead of window.location.href. Okay? So let's try saving this, refreshing our website, and we only did this for Google, but now you can see it does it like that. So let me just kind of bring in this logic to the same places. You could do it smarter in a more intelligent manner than I am doing it, where you don't have to like rewrite things. But I will rewrite things. So this one will go to Imgur, and Facebook. Make sure to save the document or nothing will update. Go to your HTML displayed on Google Chrome, and it seems like one of the buttons has disappeared. Indeed, I believe the issue is something. What could the issue be? I believe it is the missing semicolon. The case of the missing semicolon. And we'll see if that does it. Okay. That should have done it. There we go. So clearly, there was a bit of a mistake here. It's the dash. It keeps typing in things I don't want. Okay. Let's get rid of that. So now it should work. So I'm going to save. I'm going to refresh. Our button will populate. Let's go to Google. Let's go to Facebook. Let's go to Imgur. Okay. Anything else I want to talk about with this basic website, right? What does mine do that this doesn't? It doesn't have an image. So let's have an image populate in here, and we could still have it do the rotating thing and whatever. Again, these forms are a bit more complicated, so I will skip them for now. But let's add in a image and call it a day. I know I keep going back to this. I want it to be black. Okay. So how do we add in an image? I believe I do know this one. So let's say after you do welcome to my website, you have in a logo or something. Again, there's a tag for this. If you want an image, you type in image, IMG, and it will autofill for you. And what it's basically doing is it's locating an image, and then for that image, it's going to say the size of it, right? So clearly, we gave it kind of like a dead path, and you could just reference either something on your hard drive or even better, put it on the internet so anybody can access this. Now, if I use my own image, in theory, that should be fine, but only on my own computer. Let's see. It doesn't seem to like that. Is that because of this? No, it just doesn't like it. It's a local image. Let's try refreshing it here. Oh, there we go. So I guess VS Code doesn't open it up for some reason. If it's from the internet, I know for a fact it does, but if anybody knows why, that's interesting to know. Again, I am going to add in a line break so our buttons are underneath. And now we basically have make sure to save the file. Now we should have the black text, a static image, and our buttons. By the way, notice how the buttons down here interactively move out of the way for this one. Just something to notice. Okay, how do we do the image thing? It's literally the same thing we've been doing, right? So we want to change the style of it. So we're going to put that on the top. And let me put this here. So this time we're not changing the style of any particular button, but we're changing the image. So you could do this for anything. So I'm going to do image. Let's have it fill in here, and it does all kinds of things. Interestingly, it does a border thing. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of any kind of border. And you can see by default, it already knows that I want to blur it and do some kind of like rotation. Well, I need two of these. I need the style of the image and the style of the image when we are hovering over it. Again, same logic. So the blur should go away. Additionally, when we hover over it, it will get maybe 10% bigger, rotate by -6 degrees, and go 8 pixels down. You can modify this. It's super interactive. So it's blurry now, and then it comes into focus. Remember, the reason that it's so sudden, is we don't have any kind of transition. I don't want that. I want 0.3 seconds. Or maybe because it's a big element, it should kind of feel heavy, so it could kind of take longer. Up to you. But now, look at that. That's nice. So the buttons are more snappy than the image. Now, beyond that, I think the only other thing I just want to specify is for these buttons, like one thing that will immediately make them look a bit better is you want to add in a drop filter. You want to add in a drop shadow, okay? And it has all these settings. Basically, the drop shadow is kind of like a shadow that is underneath our button that makes it look like it's popping out of the page. The shadow should be black. These first two numbers are basically saying where's the shadow and then what is kind of the blur of the shadow. So if I move it 3 by 3, it will move 3 pixels on the X and Y, and it will have a blur of 10. So I'm going to reduce the blur here. And additionally, I will also have this be everywhere. So, well, I guess it wouldn't really change much. Well, I guess I just want it on the default button then. So I'm going to get rid of our thing here. I just want it to be a general property of the button. Yeah, that kind of does it. Now, I wonder if you have to also stack filters. I'm not quite sure, but let's try it. Yep, you have to stack filters, it turns out. Learning process. So in the same way we put multiple transforms, we can put multiple filters, and now you can see, well, it only applies when there isn't a hover event, but you can kind of see these drop shadows where I can make them kind of crisp, or I can make them super blurred. Okay? And if I want to, I can also add these on the hover event. So to do that, I'm just going to copy our drop shadow and make sure they also exist in the filter section of the hover event. So let's see. Put that there. Put that there. Well, I guess I don't want it on the image. Okay. Well, now you can see we have this drop shadow everywhere. I'm just going to make it a bit sharper, so less soft. And now that looks nicer. By the way, if you want it to be less intense, of course, you could do something like taking the color of the drop shadow and making it closer to white. So now you can see you can't see them at all because it's a white shadow on a white page. and you can kind of control it like that in terms of strength. So let's refresh. Let us go to our website. And look at that. So there we go. I think that is the essence of it. I'm just going to go to our image, which is here. And I'm just going to add in another line break. Again, we know we can make that empty kind of block, but I'm just going to use the line breaks. And again, we didn't really get into the div, the div, the one and only div, but it exists. Stylistically, you know, I keep changing this text. Maybe that's just a sign that I don't want it at all. And now this is a nice clean website. To be honest, not too much different from cgmatter.com, which just has a few like flourishes here and there. So there you go. That is how you make a website. I'm going to put the source code available on Patreon, I guess. So make sure you're part of the Patreon family to support what I do. Get access to all blend files and I guess for the first time HTML files. And I hope you learned a thing or two.